From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
CrowdStrike's goose is cooked. The government seeks grilling. Uber Eats apology fails to deliver. And Google Wiz sours. The House always wins. MGM hacker arrested. Casino carries on. And malware malfeasance. Ransomware attack shuts down the largest trial court in the U.S. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines. You know, on the carnival wheel of news, we've selected some numbers, we've put some quarters down, we've spun it, we found the winners, and this is indeed the stuffed animal of review. And now we're ready for some insight, opinion, and expertise from our guest, Jana Moore, the CISO over at Belron. Jana, thank you so much for making the time. I know it's been a busy week. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
We are going to dive into the news, but just a reminder that these are Jana's personal opinions that she's sharing on the show, not those of her employer, and we are super grateful for those. Another thing we're super grateful for is our sponsor for today, Vanta, compliance that doesn't suck too much. Remember to join us on YouTube Live. To do so, go to CISOseries.com, hit the events drop down, and look for the cybersecurity headline week in review image. Just click on it to join us. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and get notifications there. I already see CCL and Kevin Farrell having some fun there. Hey, congrats on all the Security Plus studying, Kevin Farrell. Hope everything is going well over there. And be sure to contribute your comments in that chat. So you can congratulate Kevin on all of his fine studying and his great advice that CCL has given him, and share your own study tips as well. We've got about 20 minutes, though. I would love to spend the entire time talking about studying for security certifications and exams, but we don't have time for that. First up here, CrowdStrike fallout. U.S. government looks for answers. U.S. House leaders are calling on CrowdStrike CEO George Kurtz to testify to Congress about the company's role in the widespread outage. You may have heard of that. Republicans in charge of the House Homeland Security Committee said they appreciate CrowdStrike's response and coordination with stakeholders, but cannot ignore the magnitude of this incident, which some have claimed is the largest IT outage in history. So, Janet, it seems appropriate to call for a congressional hearing, given, just the sheer scope of this accidental outage, or I guess does it? Well, I'm curious, what went through your mind as we've learned about this event unfolding, the actual crisis of the event, and we've seen CrowdStrike's initial response. Now they've been released, initial reports on this. How has it affected you over this past week?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a tough week for our industry. One of the giants that we've all learned to love and we trust. And, I'll be honest, when it first broke last Friday, I think we all had a collective, punch in the gut. I think we all were right there with them. And just a horrible thing to have happen to someone like CrowdStrike. The congressional hearing, I think it's appropriate. I think that there are some lessons to learn here, and the widespread impact that it had on consumers in such a major way. We've got to get some answers out there and get some education, maybe do things a little differently. And it really starts to call into question the technologies that we have today that have that deep access. It's not so much about CrowdStrike in this incident as it is about, the world that we live in terms of IT and infrastructure and how that truly operates under the covers and what are the risks associated. So I'm hoping what comes out of this is, maybe a step change in how we hold our vendors, responsible and accountable to how they manipulate our systems. And what do we do differently from here? We've got to learn from this one. We've got to make a change. But what does that look like? I think is what everyone's waiting to see. And then, how do we recover from this and instill that trust back in, our stakeholders? So,
yeah, I'm hopeful that these hearings become more than just security theater of, members of Congress just yelling about why their flight was delayed or something like that, which often happens in these cases. And yes, when an event of this magnitude, there needs to be, there is some perfunctory, public apologies and a roadshow that's going to go on. I think CrowdStrike is still responding relatively well. Like, we would never obviously wish this to happen. So we will see how that kind of public response goes, if there will be some sacrificial lambs as a result of this. But yeah, that kind of that wider change. I mean, obviously that's the much harder part. I don't even know how you legislate that when part of the result of this is longstanding antitrust regulation that prevented Microsoft from cutting off access to their kernel. The fact that Microsoft has a giant market share presence, right, in the US and stuff like that. So like, I don't know if there's any simple way to regulate this. And it seems like, yes, I 100% agree, a much wider industry recognition of this. I wonder how systematically though we can go about this, or is it just a bunch of micro, kind of like micro decisions by each individual person looking to reduce reliance, reduce risk, increase resiliency, that ends up paying off over time. That's what I'd be interested, in the 2, 3, 5 year retrospective on this, where
Yeah.
we are later down the road.
Right, because this isn't the only event. I mean, we've
Yep.
had these in the past, right? So yeah. I don't blame them for wanting these sort of answers.
And David Cross in the chat, should the Windows kernel be restricted for third-party software updates? And he sends a face blue smiling emoji. Well played, Mr. Cross. Next up here, CrowdStrike delivers Wiz Quivers. A CrowdStrike partner who was also a source for TechCrunch received a $10 Uber Eats gift card, along with an apology message that seemed to come from the company's chief business officer, Daniel Bernard. Several people on social media also shared similar gifts, although there were reports about issues actually redeeming the card, and initially CrowdStrike didn't comment on the gift. Bloomberg sources say that the Crowdcast outage has also became a reason for the failure of acquisition talks between Google and Wiz. The incident evidently increased market interest in other cloud security solutions and also raised concerns about antitrust regulators stopping the deal. I'm assuming those were there the whole time, but anything that draws more attention to the industry probably increases antitrust scrutiny. And so what was winsome with Wiz withered wildly. So Jana, the gift card thing sounds like an individual attempt on the part of an executive, I guess, rather than the business decision. Just seems like the rollout of it was so weird in so many ways. It doesn't seem to be a scam from everything that I've seen. But clearly, the impact of the Google Wiz Rift has really big impacts on the entire industry. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on, I guess, on either side of these developments?
Yeah. I mean, I think the Uber Eats thing, unfortunately got blown way out of proportion. I think that it was probably a good idea in practice, when they first thought of it, but I think they maybe underestimated what it would look like when it landed, because it was just directed to their partners. It wasn't to customers how it was originally reported. So I think it just kind of landed a little flat. And it makes me wonder, I mean, with a company like CrowdStrike, who has this incident response muscle that they've built over the years, and folks rely on them for that sort of expertise. Where's the PR, assistance and all of this? So I've been a little surprised at some of the PR flubs that have happened since this broke last Friday, which again, I hate to see happen with them. So it just makes me wonder kind of what their lessons learned are going to be around that, gift card or no gift card. But yeah, I mean, it was probably a nice gesture at the time. The whole Google Wiz fallout, I have a hard time believing that this event kind of is what was the core reason that caused it to fall through. I think there were probably a lot of things behind the scenes that were occurring. Reading the statement that came out from Wiz, it sounds like that there is probably some concern over the antitrust topic. And that's a heavy hand right there. I mean, and plus I'm starting to see, and we all are these startups that are getting the good market share where we would typically always expect them to be acquired by some larger company. Now I'm seeing a lot more of them these days wanting to keep that independence and continue to have that kind of confidence in growing their own market share alone. So I don't know. Maybe it did have some impact, but I don't think it was the root.
Yeah, maybe maybe it shifted the bag of
Yeah.
money that would have been required to one more comical sack or something like that. But yeah. I imagine the prospect of having this held up like a year or two under regulatory scrutiny probably was like, or we could just cash in with a giant IPO. Yeah, let's maybe just do that. On the comm side with CrowdStrike, I think that's the interesting part. We've been talking about this on CISO Series podcast for a little bit. Of that incident response isn't just the technical, it's about having coordination with your comms team so that there is no guesswork of, did the CBO actually send out these gift cards, or is it like having all those ducks lined up in a row, as opposed to someone makes a seemingly a nice gesture to partners, and that no one from marketing was like, we do know what the optics of this look like, right?
Right.
That has made me appreciate that just a little bit more. And CCL kind of agrees here in our chat. Completely agree. Honest motive, bad execution, and impression.
Yeah.
So we will, again, be following more of that, any other follow-on knock-on effects as it goes on. Next up here, teenage MGM hacker arrested in England. Police in the Kingdom United apprehended the 17-year-old who has not been named for his alleged role in the cybercriminal group that brought MGM Resorts casinos to a standstill last year in a ransomware attack. The arrest was made as part of an ongoing FBI investigation into the incident that occurred last September, and which has been attributed to the Scattered Spider Gang, also known as Octotempest and Octopus. So let's just keep giving them awesome, cool names, everybody. That'll help them out for sure. So, Jana, the reason why the story made our list, not necessarily the arrest, certainly that is notable, but the fact that in reviewing this hack, MGM Resorts praised its own response to the incident. Don't hurt yourself, patting yourself on the back, saying that its refusal to pay the ransom and decision to shut down all of its systems, as well as its coordination with law enforcement, had sent a message to criminals that it's not worth it to attack them. I guess leave it to a casino to come out on top. Jana, that seems to buck a little bit of the conventional wisdom we're seeing anymore with ransomware. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell like what their intent was of that statement. What's the context in which they said that? But at face value, if we're just going to take it just in black and white writing, I think that's a little, that's a bold statement to make, that it's just not worth it. It clearly is worth it, honestly, to these guys. I think that what the message MGM is sending is that they may not be the right target, move on, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth it to the hackers to continue to do this. I think MGM is probably pretty happy with their kind of results there, and that's great for them. But I think, again, it goes back to kind of how prepared are you as a business, so that it's not a game time decision that you have to, kind of determine in the moment how you're going to handle something. But yeah, it's hard to tell with how that statement was meant to come across, but it is pretty bold. It is MGM. It is a casino. I wouldn't expect any less.
I do wonder. I always try and read between the lines with this kind of stuff. I almost, I would not be surprised. I have no evidence of this. This is pure speculation on my part, that maybe CISA picked up the phone and was like, hey, maybe you could crow about the fact that you didn't pay a ransom. And then maybe that has, we're really trying to harp on that, but 100% agree, as opposed, again, not to throw shade at someone like CDK, but it felt like they never had the opportunity to make the decision to pay the ransom. There was a business imperative that they had to do that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they did make that, calculation, but it seems like MGM put themselves in a position where they could make that choice one way or the other. And ultimately that's all you can really ask, from in terms of response from one of these nasty ransomware attacks like this.
Yeah, for sure.
And CCL, kudos to MGM. All right, before we move on to our next story here, I have to spend a few moments and hear from our sponsor for today, Vanta. When it comes to ensuring your company has top-notch security practices, things can get complicated fast. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money. With Vanta, you can unify your security program management and proactively manage security reviews with AI-powered security questionnaires. Our listeners get $1,000 off at vanta.com/headlines. That's VANTA.com/headlines. Next up here, ransomware attack shuts down largest trial court in the U.S. All 36 of the Los Angeles County Superior Courts were forced to close their doors following a ransomware attack last Friday. The Superior Court released a statement saying that both internal and external systems, as well as every internet-connected device, were impacted, that the malware was able to infiltrate every electronic platform containing court data. Those are non-equivocating statements there, right? I mean, the court has resumed operations throughout the week. But, Jana, the question becomes, how vulnerable does it make the court system when every electronic platform containing court data is impacted? This story, this story is one of those that we're going to talk about today. It probably doesn't resonate with, if you're not in LA County or something like that, fades from the news cycle. But what types of concerns do you have about the potential for threat actors exploiting this situation. Again, another kind of government attached organization that seems to be extremely vulnerable.
Well, and the thing is, this isn't the first time that we've seen this happen this year. It happened in Georgia earlier this year. So, I mean, there are learnings that they could have been taking from their peers, right, in this industry. But I think the thing that kind of comes across my mind when I see something like this is, um, first of all, the access. We don't know if there was any sort of access to data or if there was any data exfiltrated, what have you, in terms of exposure. Clearly, the operations were down. But for me, in the court system, you have to think about um, if there's any data manipulation, on these systems. So how bad is this one? And really, for any of us, but for the court system particularly, I mean, how could this manipulate the data that they use for their day-to-day proceedings, and how are they handling, court led situations with like child support or what have you, even people being released from prison or whatever that looks like. It's like, how do you trust the integrity of the data then after an incident of this magnitude? So for me, it's understanding kind of what is the net result of this incident, and do they have confidence in the data that they still have in their systems? Good old COVID we were talking about earlier. The courts all went to a lot of electronic systems at that point, and they're having to go back to a lot of paper and pencil right now. And courier, I think they're currying, paperwork back and forth between the courts to actually do the proceedings. But I don't know. I just think with data such as this, anything that's government related, it could have a long tail to it. So I guess it just depends. Yeah.
Yeah. The outage is recoverable. We can reschedule court dates and stuff like that. It's an inconvenience. It's a pain in the butt. It could,
Yeah.
it could be very important. But yeah, that whole trust angle I hadn't even thought of in terms of data coming from there. So yeah, that is something we'll have to keep an eye on. And definitely seems like it. I don't know if it has a nation state behind it, but when we're talking about long-term goals and stuff like that, definitely would seem to be of interest to people that don't have the U.S.'s best interest in mind.
Yeah.
All right, next up here, KnowBe4 hires fake North Korean IT workers. Speaking of people that don't have the U.S.'s best interest in mind. On Tuesday, security awareness training firm KnowBe4 said a North Korean operative posing as a software engineer slipped past its hiring background checks. The new hire spent the first 25 minutes on the job using their new Mac to download malware, manipulate session history files, and execute unauthorized software on company systems. KnowBe4 said its security team quickly detected the suspicious activity and contained the infected workstation. The worker's identity was revealed as an AI deepfake and is one of hundreds of cases of North Korean nation-state operatives posing as an IT worker to infiltrate U.S. companies. So, Jana, this type of thing likely to happen, has happened before, and is not beyond the pale of reason here. But could this be a good teaching moment? Despite the quick action of the security team, 25 minutes. If you're well prepared and you got a company laptop, you can do a lot of damage in that time span, right?
Yeah. Yeah. This one is a real cautionary tale. I think that, believe there was last year, the FBI was putting out warnings about this occurring and to be on the lookout for this sort of activity. But I mean, it goes back to your HR hiring practices and how well do you partner internally with your HR teams across technology and HR, and that kind of what are their processes that they use to do their background checks and validate the identities. I mean, I think it's been a problem for decades around validating identities, just not to this extent where it's now, the deepfake technology that's coming into play. So, I mean, for me, it's definitely something that everyone listening to this should want to take back to their IT and HR business partners and talk to them about what is the software that they use, how do they validate identities today, and educate on this can occur. And that way it's bringing it more into focus of how real it can be and that it can happen in our day to day. So yeah, I think happening at KnowBe4, being a security company, definitely highlights that it can happen, right? And so we need to learn from this one and use it as a teaching moment internally. So take it back, start to educate with this one for sure.
And CCL in our chat said, I think more one possibility is someone legit got the job and passed to a cheaper employee for a cut. I mean, even if that is not what happened in this case, that certainly could be
Yeah.
plausible. David Cross in our chat
Yeah.
says he's heard this occurring at multiple companies. So yeah, kind of pushing that, for lack of a better term, pushing insider threats to the edge when it comes to, in terms of vetting new hires. Obviously, that's part of any hiring process, but obviously needs to be rethought for an age when kind of deepfakes are trivially easy to do. So I'm curious to see where we see the industry response if this becomes like business email compromise or something like that, where this is just spoilage or whatever you want to call it, like the cost
Mhm.
of doing business, the cost of hiring remotely or internationally or something like that, and companies just account for it. Also, maybe play some Minesweeper first, North Korean operative. Come on, I know you're on a Mac, so you couldn't, but just saying, like, chill just for like a minute. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Right.
All right, and our last story here today: ransomware platforms feeling the impact of law enforcement. I'm going to say, dare I say, good news here. Europol published an assessment that found evidence that threat actors increasingly avoid larger ransomware as a service platforms due to recent law enforcement takedowns, as well as the Alpha V exit scam earlier this year. Instead, more sophisticated threat actors have started developing their own ransomware variants, using off-the-shelf components, customizing them to their needs. A more fragmented ransomware ecosystem doesn't necessarily mean fewer attacks, as this could reflect that the overall barrier to entry for ransomware is just getting low enough that more people can jump on board, with plenty of market incentive to keep justifying the attacks. Obviously, it seems like hey, money is still a good motivator. It turns out, to get people to do ransomware. So Janet, something I guess of a double-edged sword. I'm going to say this felt like good news when I read it. Law enforcement having an impact on the big players. I guess less good news. There's smaller operations, harder to focus on each one of those. How do you read this?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that if you've been in our industry for long enough and you see these, it's kind of like that, oh yeah, well, wah wah, it's it's like Hydra. You cut off one head, three more grow back. I mean, it's so, and I hate to be that cynical, but this is just what the industry's done to me over the years. But I mean, it is good to see the coordination though across law enforcement agencies, and they are getting intel. I mean, I've listened to a lot of audiobooks that talk about kind of how they put together their case against a lot of these threat actor groups, which is very interesting. But it's we're always a step behind, right? And so I think it's good. It's nice to show that there's actions being taken, but it does take a lot for them to build that case and to actually move in. So I mean, what I want to see is how do we move this back, kind of not so much building a case and then we can take actions. It's how do we move this kind of takedown function further back into the supply chain a little bit to where it's, it just takes so long sometimes to build some of these cases and do something about it. But, it's like, it's great. I think it's nice to see it in the news. But it's going to be here in perpetuity, I think, until something really changes on the back end.
Yeah, I do think it's very interesting, this being essentially the ransomware market reacting, right? It's
Yeah.
like, oh, these big platforms are way less reliable all of a sudden. I get less of a payout than if I do more initial investment, right? It's do I buy or
Yeah.
build, kind of a situation for ransomware gangs out there. And so yeah, what's interesting is, yeah, the takedowns become harder. Maybe we're in a gully of technical sophistication for some of these groups as they build up, and so that's an opportunity, like you said, kind of move more up the supply chain and being able
Yeah.
to focus on that. It seems like every time we figure out something, turns out the threat actors are not standing still, and they like
Yeah.
making money and stuff like that. So we will track how the industry is changing. Obviously, that's one of the more fascinating things that I get to do every single day on cybersecurity headlines. I love following that kind of stuff. It's super fascinating. I hate seeing threat actors be successful, but it's interesting to see how this market develops, and as the response from law enforcement and from companies as well. So yeah, make sure you're tuned into cybersecurity headlines as the market changes. So before we get out of here, I just want to thank everyone for getting in on the comments. We had David Cross, we had CCL, we had Kevin Farrell taking a study break. He took an exam today and still showed up here. You have no excuse. Lone Wolf popping in at the last minute here. He commented in on the ransomware story with the more demand on tech, the more this will be the norm. Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of lines up with what we were talking. Thank you for that, Lone Wolf. Before we get out of here, Jana, was there any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller for you today?
I'll say both. It was both a thumbs up and an eye roll, and that was that last story we just covered.
Ah, okay. All right. Yeah, you're like, I kind of like the message, but more of the same probably
Yeah,
going
yeah,
forward. All
right.
right. Well, before we get out of here, Janet, where can people find you on the cyberspace if they want to see what you're up to in this wide world of cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also involved with a nonprofit called Empower Women of InfoSec.
Oh,
So we
excellent.
do have, right? So every year we have a large gala event that happens here in the Midwest. And it's open to anybody who wants to come. So check us out, Empower Women of InfoSec.
All right. We will have links to that in our show notes. Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Jana Moore, the CISO at Belron, for contributing your expertise, for giving us that CISO's perspective. I always love to hear from it, to give us some context and then how to take this bevy of news that we get every week. I really
Yeah.
appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks also to our sponsor for today, Vanta, compliance that doesn't sock too much. Visit them at vanta.com/headlines, vanta.com/headlines. Thank you also to our audience today. You know, we can't get every comment up on the screen, but we deeply appreciate all of you participating, being here, even just your emotional support. It means a lot. Remember to join us next Friday for Super Cyber Friday, where our topic will be hacking CISOs, an hour of questions for our CISOs. Yes, it's a Q&A episode, so if you have some burning CISO questions, you need to join us there. Head to CISOseries.com/events to register for that. And we'll be back with this show next week at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And of course, in the meantime, you can get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every single day. Give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.